Right, thank you. Just set my timer off. Right. This is my talk, Data, Faithful or Traitor. I asked Microsoft Copilot to come up with a title for this talk, and it suggested titles for, by name, the other two keynote speakers, and not me, so I was a little bit offended that it didn't know that I was speaking at this, but also didn't suggest any good titles when I was more specific, so I had to come up with this myself. Okay, so I will start with a quote from one of my favorite Radio 4 comedy shows. If you've not heard of it, it's very good. It's called I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. It's a comedy panel show. Jack D's presenter, he asks comedians questions in different rounds. One of the rounds is called Program Titles. It's a bit small on my screen, but I will read it out. Bear in mind, as I'm reading this, that it is designed to be heard on the radio. So, coming up with a clever title is often key to a show's success. Take Radio 4's Thinking Aloud, for example. Until the chairman saw it written down, he didn't realize that aloud was spelt as in allowed rather than allowed. So thinking aloud actually means thinking aloud. Proof, as if it were needed, of the brilliance of a punning radio title. So, got that one. The round on the show is then the teams take the part of continuity announcers, trailing radio or TV programs, which have been chosen purely on the basis of a catchy title. Right? So I came up with a very good title and then realized I had to write a talk that in some way reflected that. So what I came up with was kind of highlighting how the BBC's funding model, the license fee, kind of impacts how we do data, kind of the types of problems that we are asked to solve, the data sets that we use, and yeah, it has kind of a pretty big impact on how we do data. So on the right here, I've got kind of some kind of strategy for maybe a commercial company. You've got some product, you're getting some digital analytics data. And you might do some segmentation, some analytics, whatever it might be, to identify particular customer segments or different customer segments. Some of those might be higher value than others, so they might have a higher retention and lifetime value, higher revenue, whatever it might be. And you might assess the market and decide that actually there's scope for increasing the market share. So you do some marketing that tries to acquire more of those customers. And then you tailor your product to kind of hyper-serve that. So it's developing features that particular group of customers are going to value from your product. Now, if we did that, that's what I'm kind of considering traitorous, because it would not fit in with what we're supposed to be doing. So, as I said, the BBC is funded through the license fee, and with that kind of comes certain expectations. So we have a mission, which is to act in the public interest, serving all audiences. So not just the ones that are actually using our product, everyone in the UK. So if we want to kind of faithfully represent everyone in the UK, we can't exclusively rely on our digital products for absolutely everything that we do, because that is skewing towards the people that are already using us. So yeah, that's my idea of faithful or traitor. The rest of my talk is going to primarily be data science projects at the BBC. I'll start with kind of introducing a bit about the team, but the data sets primarily, and then it'll be very quick fire projects. And as I go through, I'll kind of highlight where this kind of faithful traitor concept is kind of coming in. So a bit about the team. I've got one slide on this. So I work in the audiences data team, which is part of the Chief Customer Officer group. The data science team is split in two. Half's in Salford. The other half is mostly in London, but there's a couple of people in Cardiff. We've got a data engineering team, which is basically there to support the analysts and the data scientists, which is quite nice. So they're not there to ingest data, but they are supporting us productionizing code, and we've got an analytics platform, which is a bit like SageMaker, but it's built in-house, so they're kind of maintaining that as well. And then we've got loads of data analysts as well. So I would say the data science team is pretty good at doing data science tasks. So it's not totally taken up with engineering or analytics, which is quite cool. Okay, data sets. You will also just get bombarded with BBC marketing throughout this talk, just to warn you. So digital analytics, obviously we've got it, we've got loads of it, we've got loads of data. It's, like everyone, you know, it's the bread and butter of data science. So let's start with that. So we've got a couple of data sets and then kind of one internal one. So Piano is our main provider that kind of tracks everything: clicks, page views, marketing impressions, what you're watching on iPlayer sounds, generating about 150 billion rows a month. That M is month, not minute. And we've got about 34 million signed in accounts in May coming to us, so it's a little over half the UK population is actually visiting us regularly, signed in, which is cool. Then we've got Chartbeat, which is primarily used on news and sport. This is used kind of in real time by the news and sport teams to measure engagement. So it's very good at getting scroll depth and time spent on articles, so they can kind of work out what's performing well and move things around on the homepage. The Piano data we can access every 15 minutes, but generally that we wait for an overnight ingest, and then that's our kind of historical analytics stuff. If we need to do stuff in real time, we have an internal service called the User Activity Service, which is our real-time stuff. For if you watch something on iPlayer, the show appears and you'll continue watching. That's kind of dealt with through that. But all of that data that's working with is also being tracked in Piano. So typically we would still use Piano for that, but the User Activity Service is kind of the productionized way of using and deploying data. So we have another data set called Barb, which is not us, but it is an industry standard data set. It's the industry standard for viewing figures. So if you've ever read a headline that Strictly on Christmas Day got 10 million people watching it, that'll be a number from Barb. It's been around for a long time. It's a panel measuring people's homes. You opt in to be in Barb, so don't worry, no one's like passively listening to everything that you do. But you get different ways of doing it. I think you can kind of get apps and stuff on your phone, so we can track what people are doing on their phones, and like a box in your house to work out what you're watching. And more recently, it's got video streaming in there as well. But typically, it's been kind of TV broadcast. And it's got everything in there. So it's got all the broadcast channels, the stuff that you get through your aerial. It's got the catch-up services, so iPlayer and 4OD or whatever that's called, ITVX, and it's now got Amazon Prime and Netflix as well, so there's subscription services. What's really cool about this is you can see what everyone is watching, everyone in the panel, and there's nationally representative weights as well, so you can kind of scale that up. So this is like one of the data sets that we use a lot for working out kind of all audiences and what are they doing, because we can kind of see this home doesn't really use iPlayer, but they're on Netflix quite a lot. So that's really useful. Surveys. One of the surveys is called Pulse, which is why I've got a picture of Casualty. I kind of put audience research in here because we do that, but it tends to be analysed by the audience research team rather than data science. But we have YouGov surveys and a Pulse, what's called a Pulse survey. I don't know why it's called Pulse. But they go out kind of regularly, so we get kind of regular ingests of data, and that's kind of a bit more of a data science problem to kind of extract long-term trends out of that. And because they're surveys, they kind of give us qualitative information as opposed to Barb, which is a bit more quantitative. Okay, how many time? Quick, good. Okay, so the rest of my talk is going to be projects. Got 9 of them. It's obviously going to be quite top level. Key results, problem we're trying to tackle. hopefully it's going to spark some interest. I'll be around for the rest of the conference if anyone wants to talk, because you won't get a huge amount of detail in each one. So the first project I worked on at the BBC was a school holiday model. Essentially, we want to know when school holidays are. And you can Google that and find it out, but we have models like our mixed market model that is kind of measuring the impact of marketing, and it's useful to know when school holidays are because you get different viewing patterns during the holidays. And one of the reasons for kind of doing this as a model is that we wanted to kind of get that data in a more useful format than you can just Google it. So we trained a random forest to basically predict it off time series data of BBC iPlayer viewing. And we've got it all the way down to postcode sector level as well, so you can be really granular. So you can kind of pick out regionally where the different schools have slightly different holidays. This is kind of typical viewing patterns for kids' TV. No real surprises. If it's a school day, you kind of get a spike at breakfast. Then seemingly most of the kids go to school. And then in the evening, there's a big spike again. And then during holidays and weekends, you get a bit more of a plateau throughout the day. This is what it looks like if you've got lots of people viewing at the same time. When we get down to the postcode level, you obviously get far fewer people and it becomes a little bit more sketchy. But essentially, a pretty clear distinction between the two groups, which is cool. So what do the results look like? So it works pretty well, picking out summer holidays. This was a bit of a learning for me because I didn't realize that every nation has a different holiday, apart from Wales. So Northern Ireland and Scotland actually break up mid-July, which is 2 weeks before England. Beginning of August, everyone's on holiday, which is the pink. And then Scotland goes back a couple of weeks earlier, and Northern Ireland just gets an 8-week summer holiday. Lucky them. So I did this in 2018, and start of 2018, we had a big winter weather storm come in. So on the left is Wednesday of that week, and it's kind of hitting Kent. And then Thursday, it knocks out most of the east of the country in Scotland. And then by Friday, it's only people in Manchester that are making it to school. So that was kind of one of the ways of semi-validating that this was doing something meaningful. Cool. News genres is another one that I guess is a little bit, it's kind of an internal metadata project, so it's not quite as so important to fit into that kind of Traitor faithful idea. So I'll put it at the beginning just to kind of cover it. But the challenge is here, we have news topics which have been around for a long time and they kind of structure the website, but they're not terribly helpful. So business and economics are two different topics, but you can imagine there's quite a lot of overlap there. And then world, which is just anything that's not in the UK. We also have one called UK, so you kind of got anything in the UK could be UK, anything not in the UK could be world, but it doesn't really give you anything more useful than that. So what we did was built up a network of BBC News articles based off, that is a typo because I got told I'd done it wrong. So we've done this in different ways for different products. For news, we did co-occurrence of tags, so each article is kind of tagged up with a more granular news event than politics or world. And you can kind of look at which tags tend to be used alongside others. You can also do it with audience co-consumption, which is the typo. So the same audience, or two articles can have an overlapping audience, and so you can build up that network. And then we've used Louvain clustering, which is a community detection algorithm. You can get some nice plots. Some useful stuff that came out of this was there was no world, but there was things like defense, conflict, and terrorism, which is quite fitting at the minute, and international relations. And then instead of UK, it's pulling out the royal family and associated figures, which is useful because it's kind of a bit of a polarizing topic. Public services and then crime, policing, and justice as well. So when we're providing analysis to stakeholders, we're not just saying yeah, people are interested equally in the royal family, but also crime, policing, and justice. We're able to actually separate out those topics. Next one. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of a bit of an open project that we presented it to stakeholders. It's very interesting. They were very enthusiastic about it, but it hasn't really answered the question that we were trying to answer. But it does highlight quite nicely how perhaps your digital analytics could give you not the answer that you necessarily want. So kind of the setup for this was that audience research had done some work to find out that the perception of the BBC News is that it's too negative. And in particular, a female audience wanted more positive news. So we used an in-house sentiment analysis tool that was trained on BBC News articles on Facebook. There is obviously a little bit of bias towards the fact that it's Facebook, but we kind of benchmarked it against a couple of other tools, and it turned out to kind of, we felt, work better. And then basically we've compared the effect of sentiment on performance. So overall, yes, the BBC News is quite negative. You can't really tell whether or not that's the news is negative or BBC News coverage is negative, which is always a big kind of caveat with this. Some of these topics, if they were positive, you're not covering it properly. But then what we did was break it down by different segments and then look at, yeah, this is kind of showing how this sentiment impacts performance. These are striking plots that are annoyingly difficult to explain. But essentially, the under 35s, the big green bit, means that a positive sentiment article does a lot better than a negative sentiment article when it's about technology. Yeah, young people like kind of new social media platforms, new game releases. They're not interested that some app has leaked some data. A female audience, though, seemed to love negative news, having told us that they didn't want negative news. We still don't really understand. They want negative news, turn up, and then just digest all the horrible stories. So we're having to go back to audience research and be like what is going on? One theory is that the negative stuff is that the headlines are more like clickbaity, or maybe there's kind of some fatigue that people turn up and get the big news events, which tend to be negative, and then go, I've had enough, and just leave without consuming anything else. But yeah, still a bit of an open topic, that one. Okay, so this one and the next project are kind of probably the two best examples of where that faithful traitor idea comes in. They're both in an area that we're calling demand spaces, where we're trying to work out, of all the things that you could be interested in, what's the BBC kind of covering. So this one's on news. And essentially what we want to know is of all the news, what do people actually want to know about? And we've got that pulse survey that I mentioned at the beginning that goes out weekly and asks people what you're interested in. And that's got kind of an element of a story about it, but also a topic. So the topic could be politics, but this week it's about the election. So we get quite a lot of kind of text data on that, and so we've come up with some NLP embeddings for those survey topics. And then we've done the same thing for our news articles, so we're kind of mapping what people say they want and our content onto the same kind of space. The pulse survey is nationally representative and doesn't specifically, the questions aren't specifically related to our content. So the idea is that that's asking the UK population of all the things that you could be interested in, what you're interested in. Can't show you the results because they're too fresh, but essentially what we're trying to do plot is, on the x-axis is how engaged people say they are in a topic, and the y-axis is how much we're covering it, for example. And so things in the top left and the bottom right are the kind of interesting ones. Top left would be people say they're not interested in it, but we're pumping out articles. Titan Sub was a good example. We completely overcovered that, and people lost interest quite quickly. The bottom right is stuff that people say they're really interested in, but we don't write many articles about it. I think weather might be in there. It's very British. I don't know if people would read articles about weather, but okay, so Kaleidoscope is the next project. This is a very similar idea, but for TV viewing or streaming. So it's using that Barb data set, which has kind of everything, and trying to work out where the BBC content kind of fits into that. So yeah, we kind of want to know where are blind spots, what are you not competing with? I think Love Island was one of the ones that first came out. And what are our unique offerings? Unique offerings are an interesting one because you could keep them, and that's kind of a good reason for people to come to your product specifically, or you can sell it. So a lot of streaming services kind of sharing content now. So Bluey, if you've got kids, you'll have watched Bluey. Disney Plus has all of that, but it's produced by the BBC. So Kaleidoscope is an app. I've got a nice view of it on the next slide. It kind of is mapping everything that anyone's watched in the past, I don't know what time period it is, 12 months or so, into something that looks very much like a constituency map of Manchester. And then we've done collaborative filtering and grouped things together into what we're calling demand spaces. So this is the tool. Highlighted in the yellow is Peaky Blinders, which is quite a good one because it's a BBC show, a BBC drama, but the stuff around it in that demand space is not BBC content. So that's kind of pulling its weight, giving us something in an area that perhaps we might not otherwise have something. And up in the brown in the top right is David Attenborough nature documentaries. There's a big cluster of them, which is kind of quite unique. Yeah, other competitors, their nature documentaries are just not getting the same audience as those David Attenborough ones. Cool. The wall. This kind of follows on quite nicely from Kaleidoscope, which is about identifying what we could be doing or should be doing. The wall is a forecasting tool that kind of predicts how a show is going to perform based on the TV schedule. So it's like every slot on BBC One, depending on what we put there, it gets a forecast for, if we put a drama on a Friday night, there's going to be a prediction for how much viewing it's going to get. So that helps commissioners kind of identify gaps. So if we've got a couple of dramas coming out in October, but none in September, it kind of highlights that and lets them move that around and maybe kind of homogenize some of those dramas out over the year. So it's built off a bottom-up forecast, so I'll explain what that means. So top-down is essentially time series, so you've got some nice linear growth, you forecast it, and then you speak to stakeholders and they say, we're not going to get 120% of the UK population, so you adjust it down a bit. And that kind of is helpful, but it doesn't tell you how you're going to get there, and that's where the wall comes in, because that's giving kind of maybe genre-level forecasts. So you can see here, maybe blue is dramas that do a bit better in the autumn when the weather turns, and you can see how certain genres are kind of pulling their weight at different times of the year. And maybe, yeah, the second bar there, the orange, is a little bit small. Maybe we need something more within that genre. The actual tool itself looks a bit like TV Guide, if anyone uses them anymore. It's just got basically all the slots color-coded by genre and a forecast of the audience. It's cool. So the next section is marketing effectiveness, which it kind of encompasses a lot of work or a lot of different projects, but it's all kind of the same thing. It's measuring how effective marketing is. So we have our mixed market model, which is measuring marketing effectiveness. We do that quarterly, and it gives us an idea of the performance of different marketing channels. So it might be like paid has contributed this amount, and that is better than the previous quarter. So that's helpful. So we can go to stakeholders and say, whatever you're doing with paid social is doing better than it was. And they turn around and say, well, we're not doing anything different. I don't know what's going on. So it doesn't really help us make any decisions. It just kind of reports on what we've done. So what we want is more of a real-time campaign level performance. So we can kind of say, right, this campaign's not working. Let's stop paying for that and put something else there. So what we've done is use an approach called propensity score modeling. We've used inverse propensity score weighting. Propensity score matching is kind of a bit more of a more talked about common approach, but I think that the weighting is definitely easier to implement and I think works better. But it's a passive way of measuring marketing effectiveness. That means that you don't have to kind of set up an A/B test or anything like that. So we can run this for every TV show that we're marketing. It's not just the few that we select to A/B test. And yeah, we've done this for iPlayer pre-rolls, news and sport marketing, out of home, which is billboards, and linear TV. In the context of the faithful traitor idea, I don't know if it applies to marketing, because marketing isn't content. We're just like selling the stuff that we've already got. But certainly, each of these different marketing channels is kind of targeting different groups of people anyway. So we'd typically pay for out of home to reach an audience that's not otherwise on the BBC. Whereas someone that's seeing an iPlayer pre-roll is already on iPlayer watching it. So it's already a very different audience. But the way propensity modeling works is it's removing selection bias in self-selective control treatments. So with our marketing, we have a treatment group, which is people that see marketing, and we've got a control group that doesn't see marketing, but there's usually a reason why someone has seen marketing and someone hasn't. Maybe they're more engaged in the BBC. And so the propensity approach or inverse propensity weighting is assigning a weight to different people to try and kind of balance demographic and behavioral differences between the control group and the treatment. And by doing that, hopefully when you compare the treatment effect of the marketing between the weighted control group, which is in the middle, and the treatment, you're getting a more comparable, or two sets of comparable people, and if there is an impact on their conversion to watching the show that you promoted, you can kind of more confidently attribute that to the marketing. Cool. Okay. Next one is personalized marketing. So I'm working on this at the minute. It's like my new project, which is really exciting, but I've got some kind of preliminary stuff. This is kind of focused on promoting iPlayer and sounds, the main things that we promote, in a video format. So typically our marketing would look like what I'm going to put on the next slide. This is kind of a classic trailer. I won't play the full thing because you've probably all seen one before.
You're not tempted by the idea of the gold, are you?
Right, yeah, it's just a trailer for a show. They're really good at getting people to watch a show, but they take a long time to put together. So that type of trailer takes about 13 weeks. They promote a single title, so they're not kind of doing a lot with that 13 weeks. And essentially, it just means that we've got limited coverage of what we can promote. And I think, broadly speaking, like half of what's consumed on iPlayer is archive stuff, not like the newest stuff. And we don't have trailers for that because it's kind of a long tail. There's loads of stuff that gets a bit of viewing, but we're certainly not going to pay 13 weeks for someone to create a trailer for Monarch of the Glen from the 90s. But what we wanted to do was be a bit more targeted with that marketing. And when we asked for kind of segmentation type targeting stuff, we got told we can't do it because we haven't basically got enough assets. It's just not. We haven't got the variety enough to really be able to do targeting. So what we've done is come up with a different type of pre-roll that we're making ourselves that uses static images. So we have static images on everything because they're the thumbnails that appear in iPlayer. And we're basically putting them together in some kind of animated thing, putting a voice over. They take like 2 minutes to put together because we can do it all in Python. I am not going to be talking about how we do it in Python, but that will be a talk for another day. but I will demo what these look like. So this one is one that we're putting out at the minute for paid social, which is why it's a vertical format, but we have horizontal ones as well. And what you're going to see is it starts with this grid, it kind of animates, and then it zooms in on what we call a hero image, and there should be a voiceover as well.
Coming to iPlayer next week, we think you'll love this.
Yeah, cool. Because we're creating this in Python, every image that appears in here we can control using data, which is why these are kind of a lot more powerful than, from a personalization point of view, than those classic pre-rolls.
Coming to
again. The other exciting thing is we can promote sounds, which we've not been able to do before because sounds is audio. So trying to create a video asset to promote audio content is quite difficult. So we've got this, which is it's a relatively straightforward one. But
available to listen now in BBC Sounds.
yeah, that one's quite straightforward. It's just 3 static images, but it's got this like Nokia 210, 3210 snake going around it, which is cool. Cool. So I think it's my final project, which was efficient learning. So this is what I worked on in 2020 during COVID. So the challenges here are COVID and kids working from home. So I was working with BBC Bitesize, which is the education bit, and we were basically trying to help kids teach themselves. And what we wanted was a quiz, or a diagnostic quiz, that helped students identify what they should spend their time learning. But we had no questions and no data. So from a data science perspective, it's quite an interesting one. And what we basically came up with was a kind of Bayesian multi-arm bandit type thing. We have like some hierarchical data from how Bitesize is set up, so we kind of have some similarity between different areas of the curriculum, which is kind of all set up as like, you know, one of the arms in the bandit. And the quiz learns as it goes through. So each answer that you give it, it gives it a bit of information about what you know. And then each subsequent question is picked in order to kind of get a broad idea of what your ability is. So there's onboarding screen where you can tell it like the areas that you've learned, because obviously if you haven't taught yourself something, there's no point answering questions on it. Then there was 20 questions that look like this, so we had to create these using NLP. We've got kind of follow-on-ish project where we're now using LLMs for this, but at the time we didn't have that, so this was a much more difficult challenge than just sticking some text into ChatGPT. And then at the end of it, you got the 3 topics that you started in the onboarding. You got a color-coded score. It wasn't really a score because we wanted to kind of steer away from telling people you don't bother looking at that. So it was kind of red if we were like, this is high priority. And then there's some recommendations as well for things that you should go and specifically look at. And green at the bottom. Yeah, it says, come back later, not, don't ever touch that again. That is sort of it. I've kind of powered through that a bit. I couldn't really come up with a summary. We've got some data. We've got a variety of data. We do cool projects, hopefully. We put all audiences front and center. Hopefully that has come across in the talk. If anyone gets the reference for this image, kudos, because I really struggled to come up with images that made anything. This is John Finnemore's souvenir program. So when I searched sounds for Finn, you know, at the end of the movie,